My second speaker is a doctor, and it is Xavier of the Leeds Beckett University. He is an expert in tourism marketing, and he has an extensive experience in industry and government training on all the aspects of social, sustainable tourism, also consumption. And we have here also an expert that can tell us something about corporate social responsibility. So, Xavier, you have the floor.
My starting slide will not be that different to the one that we actually saw from Luke, because I guess the departure point for most of us is quite similar. If the translators find I speak too fast, hopefully somebody will have a way of making a sign and making me slow down. I work in a university, and most of my time is spent training tourist destinations and companies on how to better market and communicate sustainability practices. And my interest basically is the marketing communication, because I think most of the change will come from the side of getting consumers to change their behavior. The problem is, for all of us to change our behavior, it's very, very difficult. Okay? And changing behavior is complex, and this is the slide that doesn't necessarily look that different. I almost actually even saw some of the same photos and thought, shall I use that one with a polar bear? No, I'll choose this one instead. But we do have a situation where the world is aging. The percentage of people that are over the age of 65, 70 is growing year on year. The cost to our governments of maintaining people over the age of 65 is growing really rapidly. The cost of medical care is growing very fast. The need for accessible tourism and society's needs for accessibility is growing. And this is now becoming a universal need. Okay? It is no longer the case. I think there's a situation where more than 20% of society now has accessibility problems. The issue is each one of those people is traveling with a family. So the fact that granddad has accessibility problems means that the grandparents, the parents and the children are not going to go to a particular place. Okay? So even if you look at in a commercial way as a market share, it is much bigger than you actually really think. We have a growth of non-standard families. The situation of mum and dad and two little children is no longer the case for most families. Families now are more complicated than ever. The percentage of families with divorced parents has changed enormously. Or with parents that are of same sex. Or children that will say, well, we have step brothers and step children and so on. In the UK, 1 in 10 people is foreign born. In some areas of the UK is 2 in 10 people. I ran a course in Zurich a few weeks ago, and they told me 4 out of 10 people who live in Zurich are not Swiss. So this makes a difference for what we called holidaying. Most of those people, when they have a holiday, they go back to their home country, but also makes a difference to those people becoming hosts of other people that come to visit their cities. So there is a blur between what we called our leisure and our home time and our holiday time. Of all these, the one that we're going to like the least, and the one that we're all trying to ignore, is climate change. Okay? And we don't like it because it's fundamentally going to change the way that we think of society. And the change is going to be so deep that none of us are really prepared. And human beings are not very good at adapting to change. Everything I read about it really makes me scared, and almost makes me think I wish I had not had children, because I do not like what I'm leaving for them. Okay? What we're seeing in the newspapers about Syria is nothing compared to what's coming. What we're seeing here in some of these photos is coming, and it will be multiplied in the next few years. Okay? A reduction in 10% in the rainwater in Portugal is not going to mean that you'll have 10% fewer tomatoes. It means that the entire crop of tomatoes will not be able to grow. Okay? There are tipping points at which society basically just, not society, but the ecosystem basically says, enough. Okay? And the photo at the bottom may look quite pretty, but actually this is an island in the Maldives. If you look at the island, all around the edge of the island, there is a wall. Why? This island otherwise would have disappeared under the water because of climate change. Why does this island have a wall and others don't. There are another 25 islands that have now already disappeared and people used to live there. In the other 25 islands, there were poor people living there and they were made to move. In this island, it was an expensive resort. So the government paid to have a wall built around it so international tourists can keep coming flying here. The real problem is that climate change is going to make tourism for all really, really difficult concept, because actually all will no longer matter. Climate change is going to make the rich become richer and the poor be the ones that really suffer the consequences. So the efforts that people in this room are making will have to be multiplied, and also there will be all sorts of other people that at the moment are just thinking, I am in business, that they will fundamentally have to change what is the role of big businesses in society. Are we in society to feed those big businesses? You know, is tourism using the Algarve, or is the Algarve using tourism for the benefit of the Algarve? And sometimes it's not clear. And I'm using the Algarve as an example only because we're here. But I could use this example about Venice, and I could use this example about Svalbard. The photo at the top with the polar bear makes me think that we have been doing research in our university about climate change and the impact on tourism. The news about the fact that polar bears are basically having their habitats destroyed out of climate change has increased tourism by 300% in Svalbard, in northern Norway. Hang on a minute. So because climate change is making those islands disappear, we will fly there more and cause more climate change, because I want to see it before the polar bears die. Is this the world we want to live in? Because that's what's happening. We're in a situation, this was not going to be a happy talk. Okay, sorry about that. You know, some other people will come afterwards and then we'll talk about solutions, and that's part of the reason why I'll stay in the afternoon, and there are ways of doing something about this. But the current state of the situation is not pretty. We're in a situation where we're moving from solidarity to what the newspapers are calling empathy fatigue. Okay? Remember the tsunami a few years ago? Because it was after Christmas and everybody was at home and everybody was eating their Christmas lunch and thinking, poor people, we all gave some money. Every time a new event like this is happening, people are giving less. Because they're saying, I already gave. Okay? So we're in a situation, people are just saying, you know what, it's happening every day now, it's just background noise. Okay? Syria has been going on for too long. I get tired of it. Okay? We need some really fundamental, radical social society changes. Our values are not really where they should be. Our values more and more are moving towards saying the person that really, really matters is me. Okay? And this selfish culture is only going to get us into trouble, because the problems we have in society in the next few years require all of us to talk to each other. In England, where I live, the perfect neighbor is a neighbor that you never hear, you never see, and you probably do not even know their name. Okay? I am Spanish. For me, living in England, that's really strange. I like to know my neighbors. I like to invite them for dinner. My wife says, you're strange. Okay? She's got used to me now, but the culture still is one where people just build walls around their houses, and culturally we build walls around ourselves. So those people who are in power, short term, will believe they have economic interests to keep the situation as it is. The people who are in power will do this. Build walls around their little cities, as opposed to think what happens to the 25 islands that have already disappeared. So, a definition of corporate social responsibility would be, this is a form of self-regulation for a business to act within the law, obviously we all want to do that, and to act within ethical standards set by our industry. And where we can, go a little bit further than that, but not too far, okay? And we're doing that to act in the common good. But we have to do that when there is a business case. We act in a society where there is a free market mechanism, and the important thing is supply and demand. Every time I go to a destination, we have a conversation about corporate social responsibility. People say growth and jobs. international tourist arrivals, and international tourist expenditure. And then let's do corporate social responsibility, providing it helps to those figures. Really? Is that really what's most important? Let me give you some examples. A few years ago, I was asked by the OCU, Organización of Consumidores y Usuarios in Spain, but also the equivalent in Portugal and in other 9 European countries, to do research on how socially responsible were these particular hotel groups. And their idea was, in the same way that some of you get at home a magazine that says, when you want to buy a new dishwasher, buy these ones because they're very good and don't buy those because they're not very good. They asked me to do this for which are the most responsible hotel groups and which are the least responsible hotel groups. Okay? At the top, the one that came out best. At the bottom, the ones that came out worst. And basically, we looked at their political, corporate policies. We looked at their responsibility towards their staff and how well they were treating their staff. We looked at their socioeconomic responsibility. Are they encouraging local purchasing of products? Are they encouraging the purchasing of products that will have a lower carbon footprint? Are they looking at their environmental responsibility? What is their carbon footprint? What is their environmental impact overall? What is their water consumption? Are they reducing water waste, energy consumption? What is their responsibility towards customers? Which of these hotel groups actually said, I will provide food that is halal. I will provide food that will be good for Muslim communities. Food that is good for people with lactose intolerance, with wheat intolerance. Trust me, the majority of hotels say we serve white, middle class families. And anybody who falls outside that, they can take care of themselves. Response I had from some of these hotels was, if a customer is Muslim, they should not expect to come to the northern Mediterranean on holiday. They should go back to their part of the world. And you're thinking, really? Is this the world we're in? Is that the kind of cross-cultural understanding we want to promote? Okay? The horror stories I could tell you about the data we found when we visited hotels in Phuket, sex capital of the world, sex tourism capital of the world. And then we went to Cancun in Mexico, and we looked at land taken away from people and people being exploited through work, and then in the Mediterranean. And we actually even found examples in the Mediterranean itself of human trafficking in hotels. Okay? So a lot of things that you think should be things of the past are still happening today, but they're covered in a beautiful shiny veneer of corporate social responsibility. If you thought hotels were bad, cruising is much worse. Why is cruising much worse? Because it's unregulated. Because actually a lot of these ships, beautiful as they are, and technically I think they're amazing machines. Okay? You look at the engineering that goes into building one of these things, wow. However, when you are registered in Liberia, the labor laws that applied inside the ship are of Liberia. You tell me what the contractual relationships of an employee by Liberian law would be. Not very good. Okay? So the data we came across, this is the data from us analyzing 80 cruise companies and looking at their corporate social risk reports. And actually of 80 cruise companies across the world, 50 of them do not mention the word sustainability or corporate social responsibility anywhere. And of the 30 that are left, this is what happens. 16% of the criteria that would relate to sustainability, they talk about somewhere in their data. And I'm not saying that they're saying we're great at it. Okay? They're just talking about what their company is doing. And in some of the data, do we have governance and structural systems? 29% of them said, we have systems in place to be environmentally friendly. Okay, great. So what do you do with your systems in place? Well, I have 16% of my environmental performance indicators I talk about a little bit, but of those, water and emissions I talk about quite a bit. Why? Because if I use less water and if I produce fewer emissions, I'm saving money. But where do I get my materials from? 0. Okay, out of 80 companies, 0 companies talked about where they get their supplies from. 0 companies talked about biodiversity impacts. Okay? Biodiversity impacts are one of the things that's going to change the nature of the places that we visited more than anything else. Biodiversity, of course, is all going to go out of the window with climate change anyway. But 35% of them had beautiful pictures of their corporate environment, CEOs saying, our vision is to be a real pioneer company, blah, 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 blah. Really? That's bullshit. That's complete nonsense. Because the photo of the person saying, I am deeply committed to this, with no substance behind that, is not very useful. Okay? If you thought environmental questions were bad, the socioeconomic were worse. Okay? So in the socioeconomic, when we actually gave people 8 or 18 for labor and decent work, is because they were at least transparent. It's not because what they were doing was very good. We had a lot of data of companies saying our employees work 65 hours per week, 7 days per week. And we thought, okay, we'll give them a positive point for being transparent. Not because working 65 hours a week is a good thing. At least you were a little bit more honest than the company that didn't talk about it. Okay? So we have situations in cruise companies where basically we have bonded labor, forced labor. Why is that? Because the debt that people have accrued to actually allow themselves to enter working in a cruise company means that for 9 months they will have to work to repay the money that they owe the cruise company. For the next 9 months you are their property, because you cannot leave the cruise without paying $3, $4, $5, $10,000 that you have had to pay to get the medical checks, to get the flights, to get the training, to allow yourself to enter work in that company. Okay, so from a human rights point of view, that's not very good. So you think, well, but other sectors of the tourism industry surely are going to be much, much better. Volunteer tourism. Look at all these wonderful Western people that are going to developing countries to help. And actually volunteer tourism now is really big business. And what we are selling quite often is this. We're going to go and have a great time. Okay? The photo here at the top, for those of you that don't know who that is, I didn't know until my daughter told me. That guy there in the middle is one of the singers from a band called One Direction, which apparently if you're 15-year-old, you really know, and if you're my age, you don't. Okay? But the idea basically is we've made volunteering to be something really, really glamorous, something really exciting. And yet a lot of the data we're coming across from companies that work in the volunteering sector is showing us that many of the places where we go to volunteer either do not need volunteers, but also the volunteers do not really know what they're doing. Let me give you one small example. What percentage of orphans in Cambodian orphanages do you believe are orphans? UNICEF says 5%. The other 95% have been taken from their families and relocated to another area of the country so their families cannot find them again, in name of, we will take care of your children better than you possibly could. Because orphanages in Cambodia make a lot of money out of volunteers going there and spending the money helping these orphans. You think, would it not be better if we actually left these orphans with their families? There must be better ways of working with this. Cambodia is a very extreme example of this. And I'm not saying all orphanages in Cambodia are doing it badly. But the key argument, I would say, is if you as a volunteer would not be qualified to do something in your home country, you cannot go and do it somewhere else just because they are poor. In your country you are not a teacher, you cannot go and teach in Mozambique. If in your own country you're not a nurse, you cannot pretend that you are a nurse in Malawi. Okay? If you do not have skills, don't go. If you're going there to build walls and make houses, trust me, they have brick builders in those countries already. What they need is your money, but not your hours. So we analyzed different volunteering tour operators and we looked at how good they were, some of the things they did. And we looked at very simple things like, if your clients have inappropriate behavior, do you have a procedure for identifying it and removing them from the volunteering destination? As you can see from the answer 0.1, when the answer could go from +10 to -10, the answer is no. Do you have a way of preventing local children, particularly in orphanages, from sexual exploitation from the volunteers. You think, is that happening? Yes, it is. In one of the volunteer tour operators, we found evidence that if you paid extra, you could buy one-to-one times with local orphan children. Why do you want one-to-one time with an orphan? What are you paying for? Okay, this was put in black and white on a website of a tour operator from the UK sending volunteers to go abroad. And the data we are finding basically shows this. The more responsible the company is, the cheaper it is. The less responsible the volunteer company is, the more expensive it is. And the data basically showed us that the companies that were towards the top, that were the commercial companies, these were social enterprise, commercial company, NGO, commercial stroke charity. But the more expensive you were, the more the company was saying, my clients are paying a lot. They are entitled to do whatever they want. The companies at the top have between a 40 and a 50% profit margin. Nice, okay? Everybody would like that, okay? And you're thinking, this is the reason why you're paying 4,000 euros to go and volunteer for 2.5 weeks. Actually, 1,500 of those is profit for the volunteer tour operator, okay? So we are using sustainability values, social values, for commercial gain. And then people come back quite often from some of these volunteering trips saying, I know I did nothing. I know I did absolutely nothing that was good to those people. And then it makes you question your own values. So it seems to me that some of the companies that are talking about being more responsible are clearly making big mistakes. Okay? And by this I'm not saying everybody's doing that. But what I'm saying is there is a lot of greenwashing. There's a lot of talk and no substance. And this really deeply worries me for the people who are in this room, who are genuinely shocked, I imagine, by the things I'm showing you, and you are saying, how can we differentiate your work from the cowboys? Okay? The people that are out there and they're just basically coming and stealing and running away. There's basically 3 sets of reasons that I've seen why businesses will behave in a more responsible way. And clearly the bigger the company you are, the more you focus on the first one. So the way in which I've seen most companies react to my advice is when I tell them there is a business case. You're going to make more money out of that, or you're going to save money out of that. When I go to companies and tell them you can save money out of this, they say, yep, okay, teach me how. Okay? We have just found evidence that in hotels, just like the one we're staying now, the average waste on food per person per night is 2 euros. Okay? So we could do quite a bit. Hotels that serve as a buffet for breakfast, lunch and dinner on average waste 6 euros per client per night. Hotels that save a la carte basically waste less. Okay, great, let's start with this. And then you're also saying, but actually you need to think what's really important to you, the water and the waste and the energy that is the expense at the hotel level or at the planet level. Why am I saying this? Because the water footprint of you not reusing the towel in your hotel is 0.2% of the water that hotel is responsible for. Where does 70% of the water come from that you're responsible for tonight, where you're staying? The food that you're consuming. 70% of the water consumed through that hotel is in the supply chain of the food that you will take tonight. And when you choose to drink a coffee rather than a tea, you've multiplied by another 300% your water consumption compared to having tea. Tea uses much less water, coffee for production uses much more. And every time you choose to eat red meat as opposed to chicken or going vegetarian, you multiply your water consumption. There's a lot of things that we can do, and hotels need to be aware of that. Putting a little silly sign that says, please reuse the towel and you will save planet Earth is complete nonsense. Okay? So, hotels want to save money through operational costs, and they want to save money through basically reducing some of the marketing costs. So hotels are basically saying, if I can get more customers to be loyal to me, basically I can reduce my costs of attracting new customers, which clearly is a good thing. And we're looking at making money. We look at making money because we're saying, if I sell more authentic experiences, customers will spend more per guest per night, which is true. We can increase basically expenditure by increasing the occupancy of our hotel, by attracting alternative markets, and particularly by reducing seasonality. And I think many of the hotels that have considered tourism for all as a viable business model has only been as a way of offsetting seasonality, but not necessarily because they're deeply committed to an inclusive form of tourism. So we have to then look at basically the issues that we're looking at. We're looking at sustainable food, and one of the issues that many of the hotels are thinking is, well, is it actually more costly for me to serve the accessible or the socially inclusive market? And therefore, when do I want to attract some of those groups? I'm finishing soon because I realize I'm running out of time. The second set of reasons why I'm seeing businesses be more responsible is because society is changing, and I'm really glad that this is happening, and society is expecting more from the companies they're buying from. Okay? And many of the society expectations, we see them eventually through legal aspects, but before we get to actually making something law, we need to build a social movement that basically says we're expecting more. And some of those tend to come from NGOs and differentiating practices through labels, but quite often it comes from society, basically society itself placing more requirements on auditing. And the one thing I would say that all of us could do and should be doing is, rather than just thinking where will we send the next round of tourists that come from poorer backgrounds or have difficulty in accessing tourism, we need to think, how are we spending money ourselves in the purchases that we make, and how do we choose sustainable supplies ourselves through our own purchasing? Why am I saying this? Because a big part of my work has been helping governments create labels like this. EMAS and different green tourism business scheme, green key, and all sorts of labels that promote sustainable tourism. And many of those are run by governments. And what I say to governments is, you're expecting international tourists to come to the Algarve, and again I'm only using that because we're here, using hotels that happen to be certified as being green. Okay, but actually the regional government is sending a lot of their staff to eat at restaurants and to stay at hotels and to travel. If you include sustainability criteria in the purchasing decisions of where your own employees will stay, you'll have a much bigger change in the impact that you have than if you expect there will be international tourists that will come and stay here using those places. There is a small number of companies, luckily this number of companies is growing, that are genuinely saying, I want the world to be a better place. And I'm not just doing it because I'm being pushed, and I'm not just doing it because it's going to make me money, but I'm doing it because I know it's the right thing to do. And I welcome you all here in this room as belonging to this last group. And I think that the key for us is that this last group has to grow, and has to grow much, much faster. Okay? I am concerned when we're looking at many of the green alternative tourism movements as being a niche. We have to find a way that some of the things that you want to do are also implemented by other bigger companies. Okay? Only recently I've been working with a hotel group that has more than 4,000 hotels in looking at how do they source sustainable fish across all their 4,200 hotels. Because they're saying, we know there's a problem, and Xavier, we're not going to talk about it, and please don't mention the name of our hotel group, but we know we have to do an awful lot to make the world a better place, but we're not prepared to communicate it because it's going to take us a very, very long time to get any of these things done. Okay? Some of the smaller suppliers clearly are in a position to talk much more about it. My worry is that we're in a sector that quite often many of you are working really long hours, and you're working with volunteers who are the right kind of volunteers, the ones that know what they're doing, and they're giving up an awful lot of their own time to make this happen. And many of your business models are not scalable, I'm afraid to say. Okay? I really see a lot of people deeply committed, but if you said, how do we grow your business model, is really hard, because you're already working 75 hours a week. There's no way we can create another one like you, or you can work more hours. Okay? So we have to find ways in which we integrate the things that you do into networks of other people that basically will learn from you, and they will basically, take from your leadership to find other ways of working. Whether it is to provide accessible tourism and making people who need accessible tourism feel normal, not to be made to feel like they're in a ghetto, or whether it means creating jobs for people who desperately need them and who want to work and they don't want to depend on government handouts and to be made to feel like they are a lesser being, or whether it means making also the family who could not afford to go on holiday to actually go on holiday, or indeed to volunteer when you go abroad and give up some of your time in ways that will be meaningful to the people that need it. Thank you.